On her mother's orders, my wife left me, sick, weak, and barely breathing, at my grandmother's remote ranch. 1 year later, she returned for the inheritance and went pale at what she found waiting for her. You know that feeling when you wake up and something's just off? Like the air itself is different, colder somehow, even when the sun's blazing through the windows. That's exactly how that morning felt when Harper was loading me into the truck, like I was some piece of furniture she couldn't wait to get rid of. The whole drive out to my grandmother's old place, she kept her eyes glued to the road, jaw tight, hands gripping that steering wheel like it was the only thing keeping her from losing it completely. That I should have seen it coming, honestly. Ever since I had the stroke 3 months ago, things had been weird. Different. Harper used to be the kind of woman who'd fight for me, you know? Back when we first got together, she'd stand up to anyone who looked at me sideways. But lately, it was like she was seeing me through her mother's eyes. And Eleanor? Well, Eleanor never thought I was good enough for her precious daughter in the first place. The air's cleaner out there, Harper had said the night before, not looking up from her phone. You need peace to recover properly. Peace. Right. Like peace was something you could just drop someone off to find. Like leaving a dog at a kennel while you go on vacation. The whole ride, I kept waiting for her to say something real. Something that sounded like the woman I married. But she just kept making these little comments about how the ranch would be good for me. How I'd have space to think. Space to think. Man, I'd had nothing but space to think since the stroke knocked me on my ass. What I needed was my wife to act like she still gave a damn about me. When we finally pulled up to the house, I felt my heart sink into my boots. The place looked like something out of a horror movie. Paint peeling off the sides like old skin, porch steps sagging like they might give out if you breathed on them wrong, and these thick vines crawling up the walls like they were trying to pull the whole structure back into the earth. This was where my grandmother lived? This was where they thought I should recover? Harper barely helped me out of the truck. I mean, she went through the motions, sure, but it was like watching someone perform community service. No warmth, no care, just checking boxes. And when this woman came walking out of the house, Loretta, apparently, I knew I was screwed. She looked at me like I was another chore on her to-do list, something between cleaning the gutters and taking out the trash. This is your caretaker, Harper said, and I swear to God, she couldn't even look me in the eye when she said it. Caretaker. Like I was some invalid who couldn't wipe his own nose. Sure, the stroke had messed me up pretty good. Left side still wasn't quite right, and sometimes the words got tangled up in my mouth like they were fighting each other to get out. But I wasn't dead. I wasn't useless. At least, I didn't think I was. Loretta started talking about meal schedules and medication times, and Harper just nodded along like she was discussing a pet she was boarding. That's when it really hit me. This wasn't about my health. This wasn't about clean air or peace or any of that bullshit. This was about getting me out of the way, hiding me, making me disappear so they could all get on with their lives without having to deal with the inconvenience of a husband who couldn't quite move like he used to. I watched Harper walk around the property with this look on her face, like she was inspecting a storage unit she was renting. She pointed out where the well was, mentioned something about a generator in the shed, talked about how isolated. It was like that was some kind of selling point. Isolated. Perfect word for it. Isolated from everything and everyone I knew. Isolated from the life I'd been trying to rebuild. The worst part? I could feel myself getting stronger every day. Not back to normal. Maybe not ever back to normal, but stronger. My physical therapist had said I was making good progress. Said with time and work, I might get back most of what I'd lost. But Harper and Eleanor, they didn't want to hear that. They'd already written me off, decided I was damaged goods, and now they were just figuring out where to store me. When Harper finally hugged me goodbye, and I use that term loosely because it felt more like she was patting down a suspect, she whispered, "This is for the best. You'll see. For the best." For who? Certainly not for me. For her, maybe. For Eleanor, definitely. For the best of people who wanted to pretend I didn't exist anymore. I stood on that broken porch and watched her drive away, dust kicking up behind her tires like she couldn't get out of there fast enough. Loretta had already gone inside, probably to figure out what corner she could stick me in where I'd caused the least trouble. And I just stood there, looking out at this place that was supposed to be my salvation, but felt more like my grave. That's when I made myself a promise. They thought they were dropping me off like baggage, like something they could just forget about. But they had no idea what they'd just done. They'd given me space, all right. Space to figure out who I really was when nobody was watching. Space to decide what kind of man I wanted to be when I came back, and I was coming back. Because if there's one thing I learned that day, it's that being forgotten and being finished aren't the same thing. Not even close. You ever look back at your life and wonder how the hell you ended up where you are? Because sitting in that dusty living room, listening to Loretta bang around in the kitchen like she was angry at the pots and pans, I couldn't stop thinking about how Harper and I got to this point. It wasn't always like this, cold, distant, like we were strangers sharing the same last name. When we first met at that coffee shop downtown, Harper was this force of nature. I'm talking about a woman who'd walk into a room and somehow make it brighter just by being there. She was working as a nurse then, pulling double shifts at the hospital, but she still had this energy about her that made you want to be around her. I was managing a small construction crew, barely making ends meet, driving a truck that was held together with duct tape and prayer. But when Harper looked at me, I felt like I could build skyscrapers with my bare hands. She used to love that about me, the ambition, the drive. I'd talk about wanting to start my own company someday, maybe get into real estate development, and she'd get this look in her eyes like she could see it all happening. "You're going to do amazing things," she'd say, curled up next to me on my crappy apartment couch. I can feel it, and damn if I didn't believe her. But then there was Eleanor. Eleanor Morrison, Harper's mother, was the kind of woman who could smile at you while simultaneously calculating exactly how much you were worth and finding you lacking. She had this way of asking questions that sounded innocent but cut deep. "So, you're in construction? How interesting. And you're planning to make a career out of that. Like working with your hands was something to be ashamed of, like building things wasn't real work." The weird thing was, Eleanor seemed to like me better when I was struggling. When Harper and I were living paycheck to paycheck, when I was stressed about bills and worried about the future, Eleanor would pat my shoulder and tell Harper how grounded I was, how humble. She'd bring us groceries and slip Harper money for emergencies, always making sure I knew where it came from. "It's so important for a man to know his limitations," she'd say with that patronizing smile. But everything changed when my grandmother passed away and left me the ranch. I hadn't seen Grandma Rose in years. My family wasn't exactly the type to stay in touch, but apparently she'd been keeping tabs on me. The lawyer said she'd been proud of how I'd made something of myself and wanted to make sure I had the foundation to build something bigger. The ranch came with 40 acres of good land and a trust fund that wasn't huge, but was enough to give me options. Real options. That's when Harper started changing. At first, she seemed excited. We talked about fixing up the ranch, maybe using it as a weekend place while I figured out what to do with the land. But Eleanor had opinions. Suddenly I was getting ahead of myself, acting above my station. She'd make these little comments about how money changed people, how important it was to stay true to your roots. And Harper started echoing her. "Maybe we should just sell it," Harper said one night, about 6 months after the inheritance. "Use the money to pay off our debts, start fresh." But I could hear Eleanor's voice in her words. The way she said, "our debts," like my student loans and credit card bills were some kind of character flaw instead of just life, that I should have put my foot down then. Should have told Eleanor to back off and reminded Harper that we were supposed to be a team. But I was still trying to be the humble guy Eleanor approved of, the one who knew his place. So I listened to their suggestions, took their advice, let them chip away at my confidence bit by bit. When I started having success with some small real estate investments, using the trust fund as seed money, Harper would congratulate me, but it felt forced, like she was reading from a script Eleanor had written. And when I'd get excited about a deal or talk about expanding, she'd get this look, not proud, but worried. Like my success was something dangerous, something that might take me away from her. "You're becoming someone different," she said after I closed on a small apartment building that was going to triple our monthly income. "I barely recognize you anymore." But I wasn't becoming someone different. I was becoming who I'd always wanted to be. The person she used to believe I could be. The stroke happened 2 years after the inheritance, right when things were really taking off. I was working on the biggest deal of my life, a commercial development that would have set us up for life. One minute I was reviewing contracts at my desk. The next I was waking up in the hospital with my left side feeling like it belonged to someone else. Harper cried at my bedside those first few days. Real tears, the kind that reminded me of the woman I'd fallen in love with. But Eleanor was there too, whispering in Harper's ear during visiting hours, making arrangements, taking control. This is a sign. I heard her tell Harper one afternoon when she thought I was sleeping. The stress, the pressure he was putting on himself, his body couldn't handle it. Maybe now he can go back to being the man you married. That's when I realized the truth that's been eating at me ever since. Eleanor never wanted me to succeed. She liked me broken, struggling, dependent. And somewhere along the way, she'd convinced Harper that the ambitious man she'd fallen in love with was actually the enemy. That the real me, the worthy me, was the guy who needed their help, their guidance, their permission to exist. When they started talking about the ranch being better for my recovery, I finally understood. They weren't trying to help me heal. They were trying to put me back in the box where they thought I belonged. The sound of Harper's truck disappearing down that gravel road is something I'll never forget. Not the engine noise. Hell, I'd heard that old Ford struggle up hills 1,000 times. It was the silence that came after. The kind of silence that settles into your bones and makes you realize just how alone you really are. I stood at that window for what felt like hours, watching the dust settle back onto the road like nothing had happened. Like my wife hadn't just dropped me off at the edge of nowhere and driven away without so much as a backwards glance. My left hand was pressed against the glass, fingers still a little numb from the stroke, but I could feel the vibration of Loretta moving around behind me. Cabinet doors slamming, drawers scraping open, the general sounds of someone who clearly didn't want to be there any more than I did. Spare sheets are in the hall closet, she mumbled from somewhere in the kitchen. Bathroom's got hot water most of the time. I'll be by twice a week to check on things, make sure you're not dead, or whatever. Real warm bedside manner, this one. Food's in the fridge. Try not to burn the place down. And then she was gone too. Just like that. Door slam, car door slam, engine starting, gravel crunching, silence. Again, that's when it hit me. Really hit me. They'd all just walked away. Harper, Eleanor, even this stranger they'd hired to babysit me. They'd dumped me here like I was broken furniture they couldn't be bothered to fix. And now they were all going back to their lives like I'd never existed. Like the 23 years Harper and I had been together meant absolutely nothing. I wanted to punch something. Hell, I wanted to punch everything. The wall, the window, that stupid ceramic rooster sitting on the kitchen counter like it was judging me. But here's the thing about having a stroke. Your body doesn't always cooperate with your anger. My left side still felt like it was wrapped in cotton, and my right side was doing overtime trying to compensate. So instead of punching anything, I just stood there shaking with rage I couldn't properly express. But you know what? That rage felt good. Better than the pity I'd been drowning in for months. Better than the careful way everyone had been talking to me, like I was made of glass and might shatter if they spoke too loud. This was pure, clean anger, and it was mine. See, here's what Harper and Eleanor didn't know. What nobody knew, because I'd been keeping it to myself like some kind of secret weapon. I wasn't as weak as they thought. Not even close. The physical therapy had been working. Not just the official sessions with the overly cheerful therapist who kept telling me to listen to my body and take it one day at a time. I'd been doing my own work too. Late at night, when Harper was asleep, I'd been testing myself, seeing how long I could stand without the walker, how many steps I could take before my left leg started to drag, how much weight I could lift with my bad arm. I was getting stronger. Every day, a little bit stronger. My speech was clearer too. The words weren't getting tangled up in my mouth like they used to. But I'd been hiding it, playing up the weakness, the confusion, the need for help. Why? Because I wanted to see who these people really were when they thought I couldn't fight back. Turns out, they were exactly who I'd suspected they were. Eleanor had never respected me, not really. I was always her daughter's mistake, the blue-collar guy who wasn't good enough for her precious Harper. And when I started to succeed, when the inheritance gave me the chance to build something real, she couldn't stand it. She needed me small, manageable, grateful for whatever scraps they threw my way. Harper? Harper had let her mother poison our marriage drop by drop, year by year. The woman who used to believe in me, who used to see potential where others saw problems, had turned into someone who was relieved to have an excuse to get rid of me. The stroke wasn't a tragedy to her. It was permission. Permission to stop pretending she still loved the man I'd become. I'd let them think I was helpless. I played the part of the broken husband, the stroke victim who needed their guidance and care. And while I was playing that part, I was watching, learning, seeing exactly how far they'd go when they thought I couldn't stop them. Now I knew. They'd go all the way. They'd ship me off to the middle of nowhere and wash their hands of me completely, standing in that dusty living room, surrounded by my grandmother's old furniture and the smell of abandonment. I made myself a promise. Actually, several promises. I was done being weak, done being grateful, done letting other people decide what I was worth or what I could handle. The stroke had knocked me down, sure, but it hadn't killed me. And if Harper and Eleanor thought they could just erase me from their lives, they were about to learn how wrong they were. I walked, didn't shuffle, didn't stumble, walked over to the kitchen counter and picked up that ceramic rooster, held it in my good hand, feeling its weight. Then I set it down, gentle as you please, right back where it belonged, because I wasn't going to break things out of anger. I was going to build them out of spite. They wanted me gone? Fine, I'd stay gone. But I wasn't going to waste away in this house like some forgotten piece of furniture. I was going to take this place, this land, this opportunity they'd handed me, and I was going to build something they'd never be able to ignore, something they'd never be able to take away from me again. The rage was still there, burning steady in my chest. But now it had direction. Now it had purpose. Now it was fuel. The first night in that house was brutal. Not because of the creaky floors or the way the wind howled through gaps in the window frames, though that didn't help. It was the quiet that got to me. The kind of quiet that makes you think way too much about everything that's gone wrong in your life. I'd been lying on my grandmother's old couch, staring at water stains on the ceiling that looked like faces of people I'd disappointed, when I finally said screw it and grabbed my phone. Malik answered on the second ring, which was typical. Dude had been answering my calls at weird hours since college, back when we were both broke and stupid and thought we could change the world with nothing but determination and cheap beer. Tell me you're not calling from jail, he said instead of hello, which was also typical. Worse, I told him, I'm calling from my grandmother's place. Harper dumped me here like a bag of garbage and drove off into the sunset. Long pause. Then, what the hell are you talking about? So I told him. All of it. The stroke, the way Harper had changed, Eleanor's poison dripping into our marriage year by year, the whole elaborate charade of caring about my recovery, while they were really just trying to make me disappear. By the time I finished, I could practically hear Malik's blood pressure rising through the phone. That cold-hearted bitch, he said, and I knew he wasn't talking about Eleanor. Malik had never liked Harper much, said she smiled too much around people she was supposed to love, like she was performing instead of just being. I'd always defended her, but now I was wondering if he'd seen something I'd been too stubborn to notice. Where exactly are you? He asked. I gave him the address, and he was quiet for a minute. That's 2 hours from me. Maybe 3 with traffic. Malik, man, you don't have to. Shut up. I'm already getting my keys. That's the thing about real friendship. You don't have to ask for help, and you don't have to explain why you need it. Malik had heard everything he needed to hear in my voice. Not the words, but the exhaustion underneath them. The way a man sounds when he's been ground down to nothing and is trying to figure out how to build himself back up. He showed up around midnight, driving that beat-up Toyota he'd had since we were 25, trunk loaded with enough supplies to stock a small army. Sleeping bag, toolbox, enough coffee to keep us wired for a week. And this was the part that made me laugh for the first time in months, a baseball bat. In case your wife and her mother show up with attitude. He explained, hefting it like he was testing its balance. Though honestly, I'd rather use it on them than protect you from them. Seeing him standing there in my grandmother's doorway, all 6'4" of him looking like he was ready to fight the world on my behalf, something inside me that had been clenched tight for months finally started to loosen. This was what backup looked like. This was what having someone in your corner actually meant. We spent that first night just talking. Real talking, not the careful, polite conversation I'd been having with Harper and the doctors and everyone else who'd been treating me like I was made of spun glass. Malik wanted to know everything. How bad the stroke really was, what I could and couldn't do, what the doctors had actually said versus what Harper had been telling people. So you can walk fine? He asked, watching me move around the kitchen without the walker I'd been dragging around at home. Pretty much. Left side's still a little wonky, but it's getting better every day. And your speech only gets garbled when I'm tired or stressed. Most of the time I'm fine. He nodded, processing this. So basically, they've been treating you like an invalid when you're not one. Basically, yeah. And now they've stuck you out here in the middle of nowhere because they wanted me gone. Out of the way. Forgotten. Malik was quiet for a long time after that, staring out the window at the dark outline of the mountains. Finally, he said, "You know what we're going to do tomorrow?" "What's that?" "We're going to change every damn lock on this place. Then we're going to figure out what needs fixing, and we're going to fix it. And if Harper or her mother show up here acting like they own you or this place, they're going to find out real quick that you're not the same man they threw away." The next morning, Malik was up before dawn, already making a list of everything that needed attention around the property. Broken porch steps, loose shingles, windows that wouldn't open, faucets that dripped like Chinese water torture. The man approached my grandmother's neglected ranch like it was a military operation that required planning and precision. "This place has good bones," he said, running his hand along the main support beam in the living room. "Someone just needs to give a damn about it again." We spent the day hauling trash, patching holes, and clearing out years of accumulated junk from the closets and outbuildings. Malik worked like a man possessed, but he also watched me carefully, making sure I wasn't pushing too hard, wasn't trying to prove something I didn't need to prove. "You're stronger than you think," he told me around noon when we stopped for sandwiches. "But you're also stubborn as hell, and I'm not letting you hurt yourself just to prove a point to people who aren't even here." When evening came and it was time for him to head home, Malik slapped a sticky note on the refrigerator before he left. In his messy handwriting, it said, "You're still here. That means you're not done yet." I watched him drive away, but this time it felt different. This time, someone was leaving because they had to, not because they wanted to. This time, I knew I wasn't really alone. That I folded that sticky note and put it in my wallet, right next to my license. A reminder that somebody still believed in me. Somebody still thought I was worth fighting for, even if that somebody was just me. The morning after Malik left, I woke up with something I hadn't felt in months: purpose. Not the desperate, flailing kind of purpose where you're just trying to survive the next 5 minutes, but real, solid direction. I had work to do, and for the first time since the stroke, I actually wanted to do it. I started with the porch steps because, honestly, they were a death trap waiting to happen. The wood was so rotten in places that I could push my finger straight through it, and the whole structure sagged like it was tired of holding people up. 3 months ago, this would have been impossible for me. The coordination, the balance, the fine motor skills needed to measure and cut and nail things together properly. But standing there with my grandmother's old toolbox, feeling the weight of a hammer in my good hand, something clicked back into place. My left hand still wasn't quite right. The grip wasn't as strong as it used to be, and sometimes my fingers would go numb without warning. But I was done using that as an excuse. I figured out workarounds. Held nails with needle nose pliers instead of my fingers. Used clamps to steady boards while I cut them. Took breaks when I needed to, but always came back to finish what I'd started. The physical therapy had taught me about muscle memory, how your body holds onto patterns even when your brain gets scrambled. Turned out, my hands remembered how to build things even when the stroke had made me forget I still could. Every cut, every measurement, every perfectly driven nail felt like reclaiming a piece of myself that Harper and Eleanor had convinced me was gone forever. It'd be why the end of the first week, I had new porch steps that didn't threaten to dump visitors into the flower bed. More importantly, I had proof that I wasn't the helpless invalid they'd made me believe I was. That's when I decided to tackle the real problem. The inside of the house itself. My grandmother had been a pack rat, and apparently nobody had cleaned out her stuff when she passed. Every closet was crammed with decades of accumulated junk, moth-eaten clothes, boxes of old magazines, kitchen gadgets that looked like they belonged in a museum. But mixed in with all the garbage were treasures. Hand tools that were older than me, but still sharp and true. Furniture that just needed some TLC to be beautiful again. Books about farming and ranching that made me realize this land had potential I'd never considered. I started watching YouTube videos on my phone while I worked. Tutorials on everything from basic plumbing to organic gardening. The internet was full of people who'd figured out how to do things with their hands. People who'd built something from nothing and weren't shy about sharing how they'd done it. For the first time in months, I was learning again instead of just trying to remember what I'd lost. The work was hard. Some days, my left side would start shaking from fatigue, and I'd have to sit down for 20 minutes before I could trust myself with power tools again. Other days, the words would get tangled up in my mouth when I was talking to myself, working through problems out loud like I'd always done. But I kept going because stopping felt like giving up, and giving up felt like letting Harper and Eleanor win. 3 weeks in, I was hauling a load of moldy drywall out to the burn pile when I heard a truck coming up the drive. For a second, my heart jumped. Maybe Harper had come back. Maybe she'd realized what a mistake she'd made. But it wasn't Harper's Ford. It was a newer pickup, clean and well-maintained, with a woman behind the wheel. She introduced herself as Cora Williams, said she ran the feed store in town and had known my grandmother. Brought me a thermos of coffee and a box of seeds, tomatoes, peppers, beans, squash, things she said grew well in this soil. Rose used to have the prettiest garden, she told me, looking out at the weedy patch behind the house where you could still see the outline of raised beds. Shame to let it go to waste. You thinking about putting it back? I hadn't been, honestly. I'd been so focused on making the house livable that I hadn't thought much about the land itself. But looking at those seeds in her weathered hands, something stirred in me. A possibility I hadn't considered. I might be, I said. Haven't done much gardening before. It's not rocket science, she laughed. Plants want to grow. You just have to give them half a chance and stay out of their way most of the time. She stayed for an hour, drinking coffee and telling me stories about my grandmother that nobody had ever bothered to share. How Rose had been the unofficial veterinarian for half the county. How she'd taught dozens of kids to ride horses. How she'd kept this place running mostly by herself until she was well into her 80s. She was tough as nails, Cora said. Sounds like you might be too, from what I'm hearing around town. What are you hearing around town? That somebody's been working their tail off out here. That the old Whitaker place is starting to look like someone gives a damn about it again. She stood to leave, then turned back. You need anything, tools, advice, someone to talk to who isn't trying to fix you. You know where to find me. After she left, I walked out to that overgrown garden plot and really looked at it for the first time. Underneath all the weeds and neglect, the bones were still there. Good soil, good drainage, southern exposure. Everything a garden needed to thrive. That I spent the rest of that day clearing weeds, my hands getting dirty in a way that felt right. Felt like coming home to myself. That night, I planted my first seeds by moonlight, tomatoes in little pots on the kitchen windowsill, where I could watch them grow. It was a Tuesday morning when I met Colt West, and I remember that specifically because Tuesdays had become my lumber run days. I developed this routine where I'd drive into town twice a week, Tuesdays for supplies, Fridays for groceries, and whatever else I needed. It gave me something to look forward to and helped me feel connected to the world beyond my grandmother's property lines. That I was loading 2x4s into the back of my truck outside the hardware store when this guy pulled up next to me in a dust-covered Chevy that looked like it had seen some serious work. He was tall, probably my age, with calloused hands and the kind of tan that comes from spending your whole life outside. But what struck me most was how he moved. Economical, purposeful, like every motion had been thought through and stripped down to what was necessary. You the one fixing up the old Whitaker place? He asked, not bothering with small talk or introductions. That's me, I said, straightening up. Been keeping you awake with all the hammering? He almost smiled at that. Almost. Nah, my land backs up to yours on the east side. Been watching the smoke from your burn pile, seeing lights on in the house again. Figured somebody was finally doing something with the place. He stuck out his hand. Colt West. Run cattle on about 300 acres next to you. Ben Whitaker, I said, shaking his hand. His grip was firm, but not one of those crushing handshakes some men used to prove something. Just solid, honest contact between two people who worked with their hands. Rose was good people, he said, and I could tell he meant it. Helped me out more than once when I was starting up. Lent me equipment, gave me advice I was too proud to ask for. Sorry for your loss. I thanked him, and we stood there for a minute in that comfortable silence that sometimes happens between men who understand each other without needing to explain much. Then he looked at the lumber in my truck bed. Building or rebuilding? He asked. Little of both. Place was pretty run down when I got here. Taking it one project at a time. You done much construction work? Some. Used to manage a crew before. I paused, not sure how much I wanted to get into with a stranger. Before I had some health issues. Been out of it for a while, but it's coming back. Colt nodded like that made perfect sense, Like people took breaks from their lives and came back to them all the time. No pity, no awkward questions about what kind of health issues or how I was feeling now. Just acceptance. Well, if you need an extra pair of hands sometime, holler, he said. I owe Rose more favors than I could repay in a lifetime. Might as well start paying some of that back to family. He was walking back to his truck when I called after him. Actually, if you've got a few minutes, I could use some help with a beam I've been trying to wrestle into place by myself. That's how Colt West became the first person in months to treat me like I was still a man instead of a patient. He followed me back to the ranch and, without being asked, grabbed one end of the support beam I'd been struggling with for 2 days. Together, we maneuvered it into position in about 10 minutes. Your grandmother ever tell you about the well? He asked while we were securing it in place. Just that it's out there somewhere. Haven't really explored the property much yet. Good water, deep and clean. But the pump's probably shot after sitting and used for so long. I've got a guy who does well work if you want his number. That was Colt's way. He didn't offer help like it was charity or like he was doing me some big favor. He offered it like sharing resources between neighbors was just common sense, like it was something that benefited both of us instead of me owing him something. Over the next few weeks, Colt started stopping by regularly. Not every day. The man had his own operation to run, but often enough that I came to look forward to seeing that dusty Chevy coming up my drive. He'd bring coffee in a thermos that had seen better decades, and we'd work on whatever project I had going. Sometimes we'd talk while we worked, sometimes we wouldn't. Both were fine with him that he taught me things I'd never learned in all my years managing construction crews. How to read the land, how to tell good pasture from bad, which trees were worth keeping, and which ones were just taking up space that could be used better. He showed me how to fix a fence properly so it would last through winter storms and summer heat, how to clear brush without destroying the soil underneath. Your grandmother knew all this, he told me one afternoon while we were replacing rotted fence posts along the property line. Could outwork most men half her age right up until the end. She had plans for this place, you know. Big plans. What kind of plans? Sustainable operation. Little bit of everything, garden produce, maybe some free-range chickens, couple head of cattle on the back 40. She used to talk about making this place a model for how small ranches could still make it in modern times. He drove another post into the ground with 3 precise swings of his maul. Of course, she was getting too old to do the heavy work by then. But the vision was solid. That night, I walked the property lines by myself, really seeing the land for the first time. 40 acres wasn't huge by ranch standards, but it was enough. Enough for gardens, enough for livestock, enough for a man to build something lasting if he was willing to work for it. When I got back to the house, I found a note tucked under a rock on my porch steps. In Colt's careful handwriting, Jack Morrison does good well work. Tell him I sent you. 555-0147. I smiled, folding the note and putting it in my shirt pocket. It was starting to feel like I had neighbors again. Like I belonged somewhere, like I was home. The morning I decided to name the place Whitaker Ranch, I was standing in what used to be my grandmother's vegetable garden, holding a ripe tomato that had grown from one of Cora's seeds. It was perfect, deep red, heavy in my palm, still warm from the early sun. I bit into it right there, juice running down my chin, and for the first time in over a year, I tasted something I had grown with my own hands. That's when it hit me. This wasn't just my grandmother's old place anymore. This wasn't some temporary hideaway where I was licking my wounds and feeling sorry for myself. This was becoming something new, something mine. Something that deserved a real name and a real purpose that I spent that morning walking every inch of the 40 acres, seeing it with fresh eyes. The garden plot I'd reclaimed was producing more vegetables than I could eat. Tomatoes, peppers, squash, beans climbing up poles I'd built from lumber scraps. The well Jack Morrison had fixed was pumping clear, cold water that tasted better than anything that had ever come out of a city tap. The fence line Colt and I had repaired was straight and strong, marking boundaries that actually meant something now. But it was more than just the physical improvements. Somewhere along the way, while I'd been focused on fixing what was broken, I'd started building something that had never existed before. Not just a place to live, but a place that could sustain itself. A place that could grow. I drove into town that afternoon and did something I hadn't done in months. I went to the bank and asked to speak with a business loan officer. Not because I needed money, but because I wanted to make this official. I wanted to register Whitaker Ranch as a legitimate business operation. The banker, a middle-aged woman named Susan Martinez, looked skeptical when I first walked in. I probably didn't inspire much confidence. Work boots still dusty from the morning's chores, hands stained green from harvesting vegetables, left arm still not quite moving the way it should. But when I started talking about my plans, something in her expression changed. "So you're thinking small-scale organic produce?" she asked, taking notes. "To start with, yeah. I've got about 2 acres in cultivation now, could expand to 5 or 6 if the market's there. But I'm also thinking longer term, maybe some free-range poultry, possibly cattle on the back pasture. The land can support it, and there's definitely demand for locally sourced meat and eggs. Have you done any market research? Looked at what similar operations are earning?" I pulled out a folder I'd put together over the past week. Printouts from the internet, notes from conversations with Cora about what sold well at the farmer's market, even some rough calculations of what my current garden plot was producing per square foot. The Saturday market in town moves about $2,000 worth of produce every week during peak season, I told her. Most of it's coming from 3 or 4 big vendors who truck stuff in from over an hour away. There's definitely room for someone local, especially if the quality's there. Susan flipped through my research, nodding occasionally. "And you're planning to finance the expansion with?" "Combination of the trust fund my grandmother left me and profits from the produce sales. I'm not looking to borrow money right now. Just want to get the legal structure in place, get my tax ID number, make sure I'm doing everything above board." By the time I walked out of that bank an hour later, Whitaker Ranch was officially a registered business in the state records. I had paperwork, tax forms, even a business checking account. It felt real in a way it hadn't before, like I'd crossed some invisible line between playing around and actually doing something. The next step was getting the word out. Cora had mentioned that the farmer's market was always looking for new vendors, especially ones with quality produce and reasonable prices. I loaded up the back of my truck with everything that was ready for harvest: tomatoes, peppers, cucumbers, summer squash, fresh herbs, and drove over to introduce myself. The market was set up in the parking lot behind the community center, maybe 15 vendors selling everything from homemade jam to hand-carved furniture. I found the organizer, a woman named Betty Chun who'd been running the market for over a decade, and asked about getting a spot. "You're Rose Whitaker's grandson," she said, looking me up and down. "Heard you were fixing up the old place." "Yes, ma'am. And growing some pretty decent vegetables while I'm at it." She walked over to my truck and inspected my produce with the practiced eye of someone who'd seen a lot of vegetables over the years. Picked up a tomato, squeezed it gently, brought it to her nose, and inhaled. "These are good," she said, sounding almost surprised. "Really good. Where'd you learn to grow like this?" "Trial and error, mostly. Little help from YouTube and some good neighbors." "Well, you can have the corner spot next Saturday if you want it. $25 for the day. You keep whatever you make." That first Saturday at the farmer's market was better than I'd dared to hope. I sold every tomato, every pepper, every bunch of herbs I'd brought. People kept coming back to my table, asking questions about how I'd grown things, whether I'd have more next week, if I took special orders. But the moment that really got to me was when this kid, maybe 12 years old, came up with his mother. He was helping her carry her purchases, and when he saw my setup, he stopped dead. "Are you the guy who's been fixing up the old ranch?" he asked. "That's me," I said. "Why?" "My dad drives by there on his way to work. He says it looks like someone finally cares about the place again." The kid paused, then added, "That's pretty cool. Most adults just let things fall apart." His mother smiled apologetically, but I shook my head. "He's right," I told her. "Most of us do let things fall apart. Thanks for noticing that I'm trying not to." That night, I sat on my newly rebuilt porch with a beer in my grandmother's old ledger book, calculating the day's earnings. $347. Not bad for a day's work, especially when that work had started with seeds that cost me maybe $20 total. But more than the money, I felt something I hadn't experienced in over a year: pride. Not the desperate, grasping kind of pride that comes from trying to prove something to people who don't care. Real pride, the kind that comes from building something worth being proud of. I wrote Whitaker Ranch, Day 1, at the top of the ledger page, and entered my first official sale. It felt like a beginning. It happened on a Tuesday exactly 1 year after Harper had dropped me off like yesterday's garbage. I remember the date because I'd been planning to mark it somehow. Maybe take myself out to dinner in town, celebrate what I'd started calling my Independence Day. Instead, I was out by the rain barrels, adjusting the gutters to catch more runoff from the roof, when I heard that all too familiar engine grinding its way up my gravel drive. My stomach dropped before my brain even processed what was happening. Some sounds get burned into your memory so deep that your body reacts before your mind catches up. That old Ford's engine knock, the way it struggled on hills, the particular squeal of brakes that needed replacing. I'd been listening to those sounds for 23 years of marriage that I didn't turn around right away. Part of me hoped that if I kept working, kept my back to the driveway, maybe the truck would just keep going. Maybe Harper was just cutting through my property to get somewhere else, and I wouldn't have to deal with whatever fresh hell she was bringing to my doorstep. But the engine cut off, and I heard that car door slam shut with the same decisive thunk it had made the day she'd abandoned me here. My hands were shaking a little as I set down my wrench, and I took a deep breath before I finally turned around. Jesus Christ, she looked good. That was the first thing that hit me, and I hated myself for noticing. Harper had always cleaned up nice, but this was different. New haircut, expensive clothes, makeup done like she was heading to some important business meeting. She looked like money, like success, like someone who'd been living well while I'd been learning how to rebuild my life from scratch. She was standing next to her truck, arms crossed, looking around the property with this expression I couldn't quite read. Surprise, maybe? She was taking in the new fence, the rebuilt porch, the garden rows stretching out behind the house. Her eyes lingered on the Whitaker Ranch sign I'd mounted by the gate. Simple black letters on white wood, nothing fancy, but it looked professional. "Hello, Ben," she said, like we'd just run into each other at the grocery store instead of her showing up unannounced after a year of complete silence. "Harper." I kept my voice level, neutral. Wasn't going to give her the satisfaction of seeing how much her presence was affecting me. She took a few steps closer, and I noticed she was wearing heels. Actual heels, on a working ranch. That told me everything I needed to know about why she was here. "The place looks." She paused, searching for words. "Different. Good. Really good, actually. Thanks." I wasn't going to make this easy for her. If she had something to say, she could damn well say it. "Ben, we need to talk." "Do we?" That seemed to throw her off balance. The old me would have asked what about, would have invited her inside, would have made this comfortable for her somehow. But the old me had been shipped off to die in exile, and the man standing in his place didn't know Harper Whitaker a damn thing. "It's about the inheritance," she said, and there it was. Not "I'm sorry," not "I made a mistake," not "I've missed you." Just straight to the money. I actually laughed. Couldn't help myself. "The inheritance? You mean the one you and your mother convinced me I was too sick and confused to handle? That inheritance?" "Ben, please. I know you're angry." "Angry?" I interrupted. "Angry doesn't even begin to cover it, Harper. You abandoned me. You and Eleanor decided I was damaged goods and shipped me off like I was some embarrassing family secret. And now you show up here talking about money." That's when I heard boots on gravel behind me, and Colt appeared around the corner of the house like he'd materialized out of thin air. He didn't say anything, just came and stood next to me, close enough that anyone looking would know exactly where his loyalties laid out. Harper's eyes flicked between me and Colt, and I saw something I'd never seen in her face before when she looked at me. Uncertainty. Maybe even a little fear. "Who's this?" she asked. "Neighbor," Colt said before I could answer. His voice was flat, unfriendly. "You must be the wife." The way he said, "wife," made it sound like a dirty word. "We're still married," Harper said, lifting her chin like that meant something. "Are we?" I asked. "Because last I checked, married people don't abandon each other. They don't ship their spouse off to the middle of nowhere and then disappear for a year." "I was protecting you." "Bullshit." The word came out harder than I'd intended. "You were protecting yourself. From having to deal with a husband who wasn't perfect anymore. From having to explain to your friends why your man couldn't talk quite right or walk quite straight." Harper's composure cracked a little. "That's not fair." "Fair." I stepped closer to her, close enough to see that her hands were trembling slightly. "You want to talk about fair? Let me tell you what's fair, Harper. Fair is the inheritance you're here about. The money my grandmother left me. Not us, me, to build something with. Fair is this ranch, this business, this life I've built while you were off playing the grieving wife to anyone who'd listen." "Ben, please. We can work this out." We can, no. I shook my head. We can't. You made your choice a year ago when you drove away without looking back. Now you get to live with it. She stood there for a long moment, looking between me and Colt, probably trying to figure out if there was an angle she could work, some way to get what she'd come for. Finally, she straightened her shoulders and put on that smile I'd seen her use on difficult customers back when she was still working. Fine, she said. But this isn't over, Ben. We're still legally married, and I have rights. You have exactly the rights I give you. I cut her off. And you just used them all up. I watched her walk back to her truck, noting that she moved more carefully now, less sure of herself. When she got to the driver's side, she turned back one more time. You used to love me, she said, and for just a second, her voice cracked. Yeah, I said. I did. But that man died the day you left him here. What you're looking at now, this is what grew back. Harper tried one more time about a week after that first visit, but this time she brought back up. Eleanor showed up too, looking like she'd stepped out of some country club magazine. Perfect hair, designer outfit that probably cost more than most people made in a month, and that smile she always wore when she was about to try to manipulate someone into doing what she wanted. I was working in the garden when I heard both their vehicles coming up the drive, Harper's familiar Ford followed by Eleanor's pristine white Lexus. The contrast between those two cars pretty much summed up everything wrong with my marriage. Harper trying to keep up with her mother's expectations while pretending she was still the down-to-earth woman I'd fallen in love with. I kept working, pulling weeds from around the pepper plants, letting them come to me. If they wanted to talk, they could damn well walk across my property to do it. This was my land now, my rules. Benjamin, Eleanor called out, using that tone she'd always used when she wanted to remind me that she thought she was better than me. We need to discuss this situation like civilized adults. I looked up slowly, wiping dirt off my hands with an old rag. Harper was hanging back a little, looking uncomfortable, but Eleanor strode across my yard like she owned it. Like she'd always owned everything and everyone around her. Mrs. Morrison, I said, deliberately not calling her by the family name she'd insisted I use during our marriage. Wasn't expecting to see you out here in the dirt. Her mouth tightened at that. The reminder that this was a working ranch, not some sanitized version of country living she could Instagram about. Harper tells me you're being unreasonable about the financial arrangements, she said, cutting straight to the point. I think there's been a misunderstanding. No misunderstanding at all, I replied, straightening up to my full height. Harper abandoned me here a year ago, and now she wants to claim half of what I've built since then. Pretty clear situation, actually. You were sick, Benjamin. We were trying to help. Help? I laughed, and it wasn't a nice sound. You helped me, all right. You helped me figure out exactly who you people really were when you thought I couldn't fight back. That's when Harper stepped forward, trying that soft voice she used to use when she wanted something. Ben, honey, I know you're angry, but we're still married. Legally, what's yours is mine, and what's mine is mine, I finished. Because this ranch, this business, this life I've built, none of it existed when you left me here to rot. You walked away from Ben Whitaker the invalid. You don't get to come back for Ben Whitaker the rancher. Eleanor's facade cracked a little. Don't be ridiculous. You used marital assets too. I used my inheritance. I corrected. The money my grandmother left me. Not us. Me. Check the paperwork if you want, but every lawyer in the state will tell you the same thing. Inherited assets stay with the inheritor unless they're specifically commingled with marital property. And since my dear wife was nowhere to be found when I was building this place, there wasn't much opportunity for commingling. I'd done my homework. Spent hours on the phone with a lawyer in town, making sure I understood exactly where I stood legally. Turned out, being abandoned had some advantages when it came to protecting assets. Harper's face went pale. Ben, you can't be serious. We've been together for over 20 years. We're together. I corrected. Past tense. You ended that when you drove away without looking back. I was protecting you. The words came out louder than she'd intended, desperate. The stress was killing you, Ben. The stroke, the pressure you were putting on yourself. I thought if you could just rest, just get away from all the business stuff, you thought wrong. My voice was steel now. What was killing me wasn't stress. It was being married to a woman who let her mother convince her that I wasn't worth fighting for. Eleanor stepped between us then, like she was trying to regain control of the situation. Benjamin, I understand you're feeling bitter, but let's be practical here. Harper is your wife. She has legal rights. She has exactly the rights I choose to give her, I said, looking directly at Eleanor. And since she chose to abandon those rights when she abandoned me, I'd say we're all caught up. That's when Eleanor made her mistake. She got that look on her face, the one she'd always worn when she was about to put me in my place. You're being very ungrateful, Benjamin. After everything we did for you, all the care and support. Care? I stepped closer to her, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to look at me. You want to talk about care? Real care is what Colt did when he showed up with tools and helped me rebuild this place. Real care is what Cora did when she brought me seeds and taught me how to grow things. Real care is what Malik did when he drove 2 hours just to remind me I was still worth something. I gestured toward the house, the garden, the neat fence lines stretching across the property. This is what care looks like. This is what happens when people believe in you instead of trying to manage you. Eleanor's composure finally cracked completely. You ungrateful little. Careful, I warned, and something in my voice made her stop mid-sentence. You're on my property now. My rules. And I don't have to listen to your poison anymore. Harper was crying now, but they weren't the manipulative tears she used to get her way. These looked real, desperate. Ben, please. I know I messed up. I know I should have fought for us instead of listening to her. But we can fix this. We can. No, I said simply. We can't. Because the woman I married would never have left me here in the first place. The woman I married would have told her mother to go to hell before abandoning her husband when he needed her most. I looked at both of them standing there in my yard. Eleanor furious and calculating, Harper broken and desperate, and felt nothing but pity. You both made your choices, I said. Eleanor chose to see me as a problem to be managed instead of a man to be respected. And Harper chose to be her mother's daughter instead of my wife. Now you get to live with those choices. Eleanor straightened her jacket and lifted her chin. This isn't over, Benjamin. We'll be speaking to a lawyer. Good luck with that, I said. Mine's pretty confident about how this will play out. Especially since I've got documentation of the abandonment, the inheritance laws on my side, and a business that's been built entirely with my own hands and my own money. They left then, Eleanor marching back to her Lexus like she was retreating from a battle she'd lost, Harper trailing behind looking smaller than I'd ever seen her. As they drove away, I noticed Harper looking back through her rear window, but I didn't wave. That night, I sat on my porch with a beer and watched the sun set over my land. Tomorrow, I'd be back in the garden, tending to plants that grew because I cared for them. Next weekend, I'd be at the farmer's market, selling produce to people who appreciated the work I put into it. I was exactly where I belonged, doing exactly what I was meant to do. And for the first time in over a year, I didn't feel like I was missing anything at all. The Whitaker Ranch Harvest Festival was my idea, but the whole community made it happen. Word had gotten around town about what I'd built out here, and folks wanted to celebrate. Cora brought her famous apple cider. Jack set up a booth selling his handmade furniture, and even some of the kids from town came out to help with games and activities. Standing by the entrance gate, watching families walk through my property, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years, pure contentment. Not the desperate relief of survival, but the deep satisfaction of belonging somewhere you've earned the right to be. Malik showed up around noon, grinning like a fool and shaking his head. Man, look at this place, he said, surveying the crowd picking pumpkins in my patch. Kids running between the booths, couples walking hand in hand down the paths I'd cleared through the back pasture. You built something real here. Colt appeared at my elbow with a glass of lemonade, his version of a celebration. Your grandmother would be proud, he said quietly. This is what she always wanted, this land being used, being alive again. As the sun started setting, painting the mountains orange and purple, I walked out to the edge of my garden. The festival was winding down, families packing up, but the laughter still echoed across the valley. I could see my whole 40 acres from here, the house I'd rebuilt, the fences I'd mended, the soil I'd nurtured back to life. Harper and Eleanor were probably sitting in some lawyer's office right now, plotting their next move. But it didn't matter anymore. They'd given me the greatest gift possible when they abandoned me here. The chance to discover who I really was when nobody was watching. I whispered to the evening air, this is home. This is mine. Not what they left me with, what I chose to become. And I smiled, because I knew I'd never be forgotten again.